Welcome to the Trinity Table Talk podcast, a resource from Trinity Anglican Church out of Littleton, Colorado. On this very special mini-season, we'll be hearing from our church plant partners and learning more about their ministries. My name's Andrew Wininger, and today I'm joined by, of course, Tim Soots, rector of Trinity Anglican Church, and today by Derek Roberts from Hope Church Anglican out of Charleston, West Virginia. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Derek, you were an integral part of the foundation of Trinity when it first planted, but you were before my time. Could you give me some background on your involvement with Trinity in its early days and its formation? Probably a lot of keeping Tim grounded, I imagine.
So my wife and I moved to the Denver area in 2013, the summer of 2013, to attend seminary, Denver Seminary, and struggled to find a church home that felt like a family. And so we visited a bunch of churches, had a pretty good idea of where our theological commitments lied, and we visited all sorts of places and really didn't find anything that really felt like home. So a professor at seminary was mentioning that he went to this church that was liturgical and charismatic and evangelical and Anglican and all these words that I was fairly confident weren't allowed to exist in the same place. And so we decided that it was worth at least seeing what not to do. And so we showed up a couple months into the semester to Wellspring, and I believe it was after the very first service that Bob Hirsch at Wellspring, who was the greeter there, said, well, if you're a seminary student and you're interested in church planting, you need to meet this curate that we just hired named Tim. And so he introduced us briefly in the lobby at Wellspring that first Sunday, and to describe what happened from that point in any other way than describing it as a miracle is probably not to do justice to what God did. God drew Tim and I together as friends, and then as the church plant began to come together, he put us together as partners in that. And I think that was very much served as a relationship that was one of giftings that were complementary in terms of those early phases of planting. So I essentially did everything that Tim didn't want to or couldn't do.
Or couldn't do, more like it. All the things
how to do. Yeah. And it was awesome. It was just an incredible season of building something from nothing, quite literally from nothing. And it was just an incredible time. So I served for almost 3 years as the associate pastor / utility infielder / do whatever needs done kind of guy. I imagine probably a very similar role to what Anders did.
You were technically the worship pastor, if you remember correctly.
Yeah. I think I was paid to lead music, but I don't remember that being the majority of what I was doing.
So long story short, if Trinity Church is your home, you owe a large part of that to God's work through Derek Roberts' life. And yet the Lord called you away from us, Derek.
Yeah.
He called you to go plant in West Virginia. So tell us about that. Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah, so it was 2016 Advent. I was still relatively new to being an Anglican and following the church calendar, and really felt like I needed to use the church calendar to order my life, not the secular calendar. So I wanted to make all of my New Year's resolutions in light of the coming church year in terms of starting in Advent rather than in January. So started praying about what God wanted me to do in the future kind of pre-Advent in 2016. So at some point in that prayer, really felt like the Lord spoke and said, you'll know where you'll be long-term within the coming year. So I'm thinking in the context of 2017, I'm going to have some idea of where I'm supposed to be in the long term within the year. So I'm not a very patient person. So my assumption was that meant planting a church somewhere in the Denver metro area. I mean, that was the vision of sort of the Wellspring Network, and that was what I thought I would be doing as well. And so prayed over different places in this sort of area around Denver, and just really didn't feel like the Lord was stirring really anything in my heart. So I knew we had some trips planned over the coming months, and I figured if I was going to pray over these places in the Denver area, and I needed to pray everywhere I went, maybe this was God's sovereign way of leading us to where we were going to be in the long term. And so the first trip we made was to Charleston, West Virginia, the place where I had lived most recently prior to going to Denver for seminary. And we came back for a wedding in January of 2017. I believe it was the first week of January. And really, we had like trips planned to cool places. We had trips planned to like the Gulf Coast of Florida and to Fort Worth, Texas. And those places seemed like fun places to go plant a church. I could really see myself being a beach priest and wearing flip-flops in the pulpit, and could really imagine a cool college town, being a cool college town priest, being in Fort Worth. But really at that point was praying, please God, don't send us to West Virginia, any place but West Virginia. And so came back a week early to spend time with family and friends, and made it an entire week without spending any time praying, and made it to the wedding. And probably 20, 30 minutes before the wedding started, we were done with pictures and had some time to step away. So I started walking around the downtown area of Charleston and praying. And the Lord in that time gave me 3 visions of kind of for perspective on the area. And the first was faces of people that we knew who had taken steps with the Lord while we were gone. And so really just felt like God was moving in the city. He was doing something that had nothing to do with us. And if we came back and planted a church, it would just be stepping into the stream of work that God had already been doing. The second was people we knew who had overdosed or committed suicide as a result of the opioid crisis. I think there were 6 people in my wife's graduating class who had either committed suicide or died in the year or 2 prior to us moving back. So really, I think for the first time, felt the depth of the need of the area, and just felt brokenhearted for the people who, and really that the clear answer to the problem was the gospel. And so the third was just Jesus himself inviting us to be a part of what he was doing. So really had no idea what to do with that. Took it back to Colorado, sat for my ordination exams the Monday after, and finished the first day of tests, and was sitting down with Tim after. And I just remember at one point he kind of got serious and said, "So do you have any clarity on the future?" And I'm like, well, I think maybe God's calling us back to West Virginia to plant a church. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. I just really felt like when you got in the car yesterday that the Spirit spoke and said, God's calling you back to West Virginia. But how do you tell your employee that you want them to move as far away as possible from you?" It's like real passive aggressive way to fire somebody.
Yeah, that's a true story. Some people won't believe that's a true story. That's a true story.
Yeah, it was so crazy. But in that conversation, he said, "Well, if you think that might be where God's calling you, then you need to talk to my friend Bishop Steve Breedlove, who's a bishop who has churches in that area." And so I figured it was a bit presumptuous to email a bishop telling them that I wanted to plant a church before I had even finished my ordination exams. So I finished them that week, and then I think it took till the following Wednesday to work up the courage to actually reach out and say that I thought that's what God was doing. And he emailed me back in about 5 minutes, which has not been my experience of of emailing important people and getting quick responses. So I opened the email, and I'm thinking, like, this got to be a form letter, right? Like, thank you for your interest in planning in the Diocese of Christ Our Hope. We'll call you, don't call us. But that's not at all what I got. I got an email that said, hey, Derek, you'll probably never believe this, but I was actually in West Virginia last weekend with my wife, Sally, praying with some people, praying that God would send a church planter to reach out to us, saying that he wanted to plant a church in West Virginia. And he said, I would normally be inclined to not really pay much attention to your email, but given the circumstances, I think we need to continue talking. So we had a number of conversations over the coming months. Mind you, the initial time of prayer happened in January of 2017, and we sold our house in Colorado, loaded a truck, and we're back in West Virginia by May of 2017, May of the same year. So it's absolutely unbelievable timeline. Like, looking back, I'm like, how in the world did we even do that? It's hard to even imagine. So we had our first meetings in our living room with about 6 folks in July, and had a couple preview services in the coming months. And then we launched the church on January 28th, 2018. So almost 1 year, just a little over 1 year after the initial calling.
Praise the Lord. That's, I think everyone who knows you, Derek, knows that the Lord had to, be really clear with you to get through that thick skull of yours, exactly what he wanted
absolutely.
to do in West Virginia. So he just made it as clear could be.
Yeah,
and
would
he's
not have done it otherwise.
prospered
There's
the
no
work.
chance. Yeah, no chance I would have ever come any other way.
But it's such a cool testimony to God's provision in it, in
Amen.
so many ways. I mean, you remember I had a vision and an audible word to plant in Northeast Littleton.
Yeah.
I at that time, I was planning on going to Virginia at the time. I wasn't planning on staying out here. God has his way of communicating to those of us that need clarity because we have a hard time listening.
I don't even know if I would have listened had I not known that story. I don't even know if I would have paid attention. And so I am grateful for that legacy in terms of listening for the Lord to speak in terms of location and where to plant, not being presumptuous and saying, this is where I want to be.
Amen. So Derek, since you've been there, your time there has sparked a planting movement in West Virginia in the Anglican Church in North America. Could you give us a brief history, and we're starting to run low on time here, of what God has done? I believe, are you up to 6 churches almost now in West Virginia?
Yeah.
Or what is
Yep.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So we got back those folks that the bishop was praying with in West Virginia prior to me reaching out to him. Lived about an hour from the town where we planted. So very quickly on, we decided that it would be smart for us to begin looking to plant something in that direction, to really just make it more accessible to those folks and allow them to participate really in the life of the church and invite their friends and family and all those things. So it was about 2 years in that we were able to kind of pick up enough steam in Beckley, West Virginia to be able to hire a planter and kind of launch a church, which launched ironically in March of 2020. If you remember what was going on in the world around that time, it was not exactly the most ideal time to gather large groups of people. So there was lots of phone conversations, lots of one-on-one, lots of outside worship that first year for them, and it really was a beautiful beginning of lowering expectations and allowing things to develop at a pace that was healthy and sustainable. So not long after that, we started having folks coming from the other direction, right? An hour the other way. So we had about 25 folks who were coming over from Huntington, West Virginia. And so again, the same thing. We said, okay, we see this pattern that seems to be a thing. God, what do you want to do with it? And so shortly after that, we had a guy who was ordained in another diocese who started coming to our church, who was teaching at a classical school in the city. And so we decided to get behind him and plant a church in another diocese. And so we sent some folks and this guy to Huntington and planted a church there. And now we've got a church coming from Beckley, up just about an hour up the road in Somersville. Same story. There are a few people coming from that part of town away, and we've hired a planter and are going through the process of getting that church established in Somersville. We've got a group meeting in Morgantown, and hired a planter there a couple weeks ago. And we have actually the oldest church in the state in our diocese, Pastor Jim Sally in Parkersburg, which he's kind of the guy who was tilling the hard soil before God was really moving in exciting ways. Lots of people are reaching out now saying they want to be involved in things in West Virginia, but Jim was doing it before it was cool. Anybody who knows him, he wears cowboy boots and he's like in his 60s, maybe late 50s. He was probably gonna be mad if he hears me say he's in his 60s, but
I'll be sure
he's
to
not
send
a cool
this
guy.
podcast to him.
He's the original hipster priest in West Virginia, doing it before it was cool.
That's right.
Yeah, man.
Brother, we're all just so encouraged to see what God's doing there. I mean, it's this forgotten part of the country by so many, but not forgotten in God's work for redemption. And that just encourages me every day to continue in the work of planting churches, but also encourages me to keep my eyes on the overlooked things. Right?
Yeah, amen.
And the work of God through you there has just been a constant reminder to me to keep my eyes out for overlooked things, because those are the very things that God uses to glorify his name. So, Derek, how can the church be praying for you right now and the work of church planting in West Virginia?
Yeah, I mean, Hope Church specifically, we've gone through 2 cycles of sending a large chunk of our people out to plant other churches. So I think we're just in kind of a season of regrouping and really seeking the Lord in terms of who he wants us to be in our city and how he wants us to serve the people of our place, not necessarily looking at planting another church an hour away, where we've kind of filled up all of the places with population centers within an hour of where we are, but really looking toward how to grow up as a congregation who isn't looking to send a group somewhere else, but looking to really be planted and rooted and established in our own city. And then I think related to that, I would say the prayer is for growth, and not growth for growth's sake or to so we can feel good about ourselves, but growth for the sake of inviting more people into this healthy place of rest and of the gospel that we've built here.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode. For more information about Hope Church Anglican, visit hopecharleston.org. And for more information about Trinity Anglican Church, visit trinitylittleton.com.